Welcome everybody to another permutation installment of Inside Reality. I'm Jeffrey Candelaria, the co-host with the producer and co-host as well, Mr. Jimmy Tran. We're with you every Thursday. We ask you to subscribe and share the podcast. We dare to peek at truth and dissect obvious things. Today, we're going to talk about right behind me the Saturn V rocket. Jimmy's going to take the position that we did not land on the moon, which is ridiculous. And of course, I'm going to assume the position that we did land on the moon, I believe, 6 times, beginning in July 69 and concluding in December of 1972, with New Mexico's own geologist being the last person to actually, as a Homo sapien, leave a footprint on the moon. We're also going to talk about living in a binary society. Everything tends to be dichotomized. Every position has to be either this or that. When I've typically put forth that life is the space between the notes, not the notes themselves. And so again, we're with you every Thursday. We dissect obvious things. We dare look at truth. I'm Jeffrey Candelaria. This is Jimmy Tran. Welcome, everyone. Jimmy, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, thanks. That's a great introduction and great preview of what we're going to be talking about today to help us stay on
Yeah.
topic. So this is a very interesting and
Take your
fun.
tinfoil hat off first. I could see some of the foil
Well,
under your
I,
under your little hat there.
I have over the years explored the different thoughts and different ideas, and I can understand people's position. I'm not saying entirely that I'm on that side of the fence, but it's certainly an interesting conversation. And I also have some other ideas or thoughts about it, about that position, that as far as argument that has never been presented. So I thought it would be
Okay.
fun to kind of present
Yeah.
those, and then we can dissect them, right? And
Which
so
is really unique about this show because I'm not aware of your preparation when we talk about a particular topic. So it's very extemporaneous, which I think is part of the magic of this podcast. It's not like we're setting each other up with, oh, this is what you're going to say and all that. That's what I enjoy about, debating you and talking to you about what have you, is we put forth our conviction, our thoughts, our opinions based on the limbic part of our brain, based on frontal cortex, extemporaneously right here in real time. Again, if you'd like to sponsor the show or subscribe to the show or share the show, how does that happen, Jimmy?
So real easy, on in the description, there's a link to our Patreon page where I set up so that you can sponsor us and support us, and we'll definitely give a shout out to you. As well as I'm working on some merch and some other ways in which we can sponsor us. I mean, if you're in a business and want to highlight something, maybe from a particular category or subject matter that you think would be great to be a sponsor for that, we're open to that as well. So we're looking at different options. So that's how we'll do it, and
Very
we're
good.
working on a website so that you can actually have some of this stuff there as well. So here we
Yeah, and
go.
it's a unique podcast because we don't, at least I don't believe you do. We don't talk in stupid platitudes and cliches.
I don't
When we
like that.
do,
Yeah.
we dive deeper and we dissect obvious things. Like today, we're going to be talking about two things. Did the United States land on the moon between July 69 and December 1972 with, I believe, 6 different missions? Might have been seven because one of them was aborted in April of 70. Of
Well,
course,
and then we
they,
have also Apollo 13, of course, as you know.
yeah,
That one didn't
right.
make it there.
Well,
So,
that's the one I'm referring to,
yeah.
April of 1970. And I consider myself a quasi expert in this field because I actually build little rockets. I was alive and watched the actual moon landing when I was a little boy in July of 69 in Albuquerque, New Mexico, at my Aunt Gloria's house. Um, I have followed the space program since I was a little boy, mostly through Gemini and Apollo. Mercury was a little bit before my time. Also, I I'm an ast- I'm an amateur astronomer, so this kind of stuff, I actually have spent a lot of time devoted to. So let's get right to it.
Yeah. And
So we all know.
and
Go
for
ahead.
me, I have a little bit of background there. I mean, my first job was at JPL as I was so in kind of the space side, but more
Yeah.
on the exploration, robotics, and so
Yeah.
forth. So space and all that has always been an intrigue of mine as well. So when I first heard of this subject matter of, well, we didn't really land on the moon, and here's why, and here's
Yeah.
the video footage and all that kind of stuff, I was like, okay, this is interesting. And for me, it's not so much that I prepare anything. It's just that I've given a lot of thoughts about a lot of things, right? Because that's just how I work and how I function. And so yes, I have certain worldview, but those are oftentimes crafted through process of really deep thinking or exploration or learning or education and so forth. And
Yeah.
certainly I can't say that I've learned everything, but it has given me a lot broader perspective on a lot of things. And sometimes I cross
Yeah.
over, as well. So that's an important part of that. And so the crossovers are very interesting because it really brings a very interesting thought process to different
Well,
things.
that's why I do this podcast, because I operate my life unapologetically on a three peer basis. One, have a curious mind,
Yep.
uh, critically think. Actually, there's four: take action and have conviction.
Yeah.
That's what I'm. If anybody knows me, that's what I'm about. And again, obviously, I'm a human being, so I'm wrong 20, 13% of the time, which means I'm right 83%, no, 90, 80, 87% of the time.
So you're B
But
plus
anyway,
in being right. You're
yeah,
in a B plus
uh,
range.
I prefer an A minus
A
grade.
minus.
But anyway, uh, so let's talk about this. So this all started with the Sputnik thing in
Yes.
57, 58, when Russia launched the little satellite thing, and the United States, with its arrogance, was like, "Oh my God!" They were taken back because we were ill
Yeah.
prepared for really any kind of space exploration, let alone
Yeah.
going to the moon.
Yeah.
And then, so, at around that time, Eisenhower was transitioning to Kennedy. Kennedy had to, make a signature statement,
Yeah.
one of which was, do what your country, whatever,
Ask what
and the
not what
country
your
does.
country can do for
Right,
you,
right,
but ask what you can do for
whatever.
your country. Yeah.
He basically says, get off your ass. Don't expect government to just
Yeah.
feed you all the time. Do something. So we invented Peace Corps and all that, which I applaud. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
But he also said, in that relative time frame, might have been 61, 62, that we're going to go to the moon by the end
Yeah.
of the decade.
Yes.
So, and prior to that, concomitantly, NASA had been formed, and they were galvanizing all their resources, and started with I don't remember if it was the Titan rocket, but the first of three permutations of rockets that led to the actual landing was Mercury,
Yeah.
which was Ellen Shepard and Glenn, and they were just trying to, escape. Well, not escape, but they were not escape completely Earth's orbit. They were orbiting,
Yeah.
around the Earth. So that's kind of what that was about.
Yeah.
Gemini, which Gemini 2, right?
Yep.
You had two astronauts, bigger rocket, and its endeavor was to master uh, rockets separating from the capsule or the
Yep.
main rocket, I guess, and then coming back to Earth safely and walking in space, that type of thing. So they
Yeah.
were doing a number of more complicated maneuvering
Yeah.
through Project Gemini, and there were
Yeah.
probably 5 or 6 missions there.
Yeah.
And then the first Apollo mission, if I remember, was 67. 3 astronauts actually died on the launch pad because the capsule had, with all the oxygen, there was a spark in it. The
Yeah.
environment essentially just, burned. It's incinerated 3, unfortunately, 3 human beings,
Yeah.
astronauts.
Well, I want to.
But that,
And I
yeah,
want to
go
touch
ahead.
on that real quick too. Is that in one respect, if we look at our modern society and where we are today, and this is where I think that it's very interesting, is that if we were to if everything shifted, time shifted to today, right? What was going on then? Okay, with the modern sensibility we have today, I don't think we would have ever reached that level. I mean, because
Yeah.
with those 3 deaths, I mean, we would have.
Oh, I agree.
It would have
Absolutely.
scrapped everything and never really gone anywhere further. And I think
Yeah.
that that's also important to underscore. And I think that you harp on that often, about
Well,
the difference
for good,
of the
for good or bad,
generational
or
perspective.
the good or bad or ugly, and there's a lot of ugly here. You had 3 networks plus PBS,
Yeah.
so you would get, you would basically be told what to do
Yeah.
and what to watch
And what to show.
and what worldview that we're all living in.
Yeah.
Now, because of the phone thing or whatever social media, people can
Bypass
almost
that.
invent their own worldview
Exactly.
and attract and gravitate toward other people that share whatever the worldview that is. Like if you want to live as a giraffe, seriously,
You
there
can.
are people that live as giraffes. There are people in California and other parts of this crazy country of ours that urinate in a cat box
Yeah. Or
and pretend they're cats.
yeah.
That would not have happened in the 50s or 60s or maybe even the 70s. That person would have been committed to an asylum. Is that good? Is it bad? I don't know. I'm just telling you.
Yeah. Yeah.
The way we were able to galvanize resources during the 60s is possibly not possible today.
Yeah.
I don't know. But anyway, I'm just giving you some context, okay?
No, I
so
agree.
then after Gemini and after the first Apollo, 3 astronauts, were incinerated. NASA didn't stop. The United States didn't stop. We kept going. So then we culminated Apollo with orbiting the moon in December 1968, not landing on the moon,
Yeah.
when the most famous photograph in the history of humankind took place, Earthwise,
Yeah.
where you see from the moon,
Yep.
little planet Earth in all its vulnerability against the backdrop of the galaxy,
Yeah.
or I guess
It gives me the
super
chills just
context,
even thinking about that,
the universe. Yeah, I still have a photo of it.
Yeah.
So then 6 months later, Collins, Buzz Aldrin, and Neil Armstrong, in my view, landed on the moon. So
Okay.
to this point, and I want you to debate this. To
Okay.
this point, you're talking about 9 years,
Yeah.
right? Maybe more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Probably in today's dollars, $100 billion.
Easily. Yeah.
3 astronauts dead. The expectation of the country is we're going to land on the moon. So
Yeah.
you've got the psychology of it.
Yep.
You've got probably 10, 20, 30,000 people in Houston, in Cocoa Beach, in Albuquerque, New Mexico, at Sandia Lab, wherever,
Yep.
all putting together the science and the technology to launch this rocket, which, over, I forgot how many millions of pounds of thrust. Because keep in mind, this rocket, to escape our orbit, has to travel a minimum of 24,000 miles an hour.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So you're talking about all this going on.
Yep.
And to this point, you're telling me that all this is leading to faking the landing on the moon in July of 69 so
Okay.
far.
So
to this
let me
point.
let me kind of put the backdrop, right? Okay. So part of this
Inside reality, folks.
That's right.
This is inside reality.
Okay. Yeah. For better or for worse, we're diving into the mind of Jimmy Tran right now.
God.
Right. Anyway, so you got to think about the backdrop. What is the backdrop here, right? We're in the midst of the Cold War.
Cold War.
Yeah,
with
exactly.
Russia.
And so when Sputnik took place, I think it was 1957, right? It sparked a whole different dynamic
Yes.
that we didn't expect. I mean, obviously, there were rumors,
Yeah.
but then all of a sudden that happened, and it created the dynamics behind it. So that's one factor, right? The other factor, obviously, is that we do know that there were 10 others, of course, because Apollo 11 was the one that landed, right? So we know that there were 1 through 10, right? I mean that's easy enough, right? So
I don't know that there were actually 10. There were other missions that predated.
Yeah, they didn't all go. They didn't all get sent up. I mean, there was different stages. Yeah, you're right. There are a few that were like scrapped before they even got further because they just jumped over, and I mean, it's just a standard revisioning type of activity. Right? I mean,
They had to accomplish different maneuvers before
Correct.
they could do this.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. So
Yeah.
different ones their mission for each one was different, right? So Apollo 11 really is the name of the spaceship, but it's also the mission was Apollo 11 had specific criteria what they're going to do, right? I think
Land on the moon.
I think 9 was the first attempt to land, and it didn't make it, if I remember correctly.
No, that's not.
No,
I don't believe that.
No, they didn't go. They didn't go as far or something.
The mission before the one that landed was December 68 when I hate saying the the 3 astronauts left, 2 of which orbited the moon. That was the first time they went to the dark side of the moon, where there was actually no communication at all with NASA in Houston or whatever for I forgot how many minutes, because those 2 orbiting the moon were behind. Actually, there might have been 3 in that capsule because they didn't land. But the point is, that mission, its mission was to actually go to the moon in terms of distance, which is 250,000 miles from
Yeah.
Earth or something like that, 250,000 miles, and orbit the moon to demonstrate that it could do that and return to Earth and safely
Safely.
deposit the
Yeah.
3. Because the other aspect of this mission, there were so many factors nobody knew, was will the computer work? Will the communications work? Does all the physics of orbiting work?
Yeah,
Also, does gravity function like we think it will? Can astronauts stay in space for 4 days?
Yeah.
All this stuff wasn't really known.
Correct.
And will the shield
Hold up during
right
re-entries
here?
and stuff. Yeah.
I feel like I'm Walter Cronkite here. Will the shield right here? 'Cause this is
Underneath
right. It's actually right
Yeah.
here with my index
Yeah.
fingers. Will that sustain not only the G forces coming back into Earth's orbit, but the sheer heat,
Yep.
HEAT.
Yeah.
So all of these things were really not known,
Correct.
and that's why that particular mission in '68 December was so pivotal.
Yeah.
Because it demonstrated all this could happen. What it didn't demonstrate, though, the lunar module itself,
Yeah.
which we'll talk about.
So anyway, I mean, so a few years ago, I saw a presentation, or it showed footage of the outtakes, so to speak, of the landing
Right.
and all that, and that was
Right,
kind of
right,
like definitive proof and so forth, and I don't know if that's necessarily definitive proof. So I'm just saying that for me,
What did you see? Give us an example. Be specific.
well, you saw
Can't
the
just say outtakes. I don't know what
Well,
that means.
well, you saw the planning. I think, if I remember correctly, it's been a few years. So there was the walking on. It was footage, like old footage, and they were showing the astronauts there on what looks like the moon and so forth, right? And so that's kind of that's where a lot of the conspiracy theory, if you will, come from on that. And
If you were arguing in a court of law, the judge would say you're not making any sense. Go to the next
well,
point.
I'm not here. I don't. Like I
I'll
said-
give you an example. I'm going to take your position for a second.
Okay.
One of the arguments that we didn't on the moon is how come you didn't see any stars?
Okay, yeah, that's all part of it. I mean, the
And
Van Allen
the
belt.
reason you don't see any
the
stars,
radiation-
the reason you don't see any stars is like when you're on a beach in California and it's 2 o'clock during the day. There's so much just ambient light everywhere and
Yeah.
radiation, coming off the sand itself. Blah blah blah. That you're not going to see stars during the day. So there's, and I'm not exactly the most articulate person arguing that particular point,
Sure.
but that's been dismissed as to why you don't see stars.
Yeah.
The astronauts themselves, I understand, did see, literally millions of stars. Actually, I don't know if it's millions, because you can see galaxies and galaxies and stars. The point
there's
is,
billions.
they
of them,
saw,
and trillions.
they
of them,
saw stuff.
Yeah.
The other argument was, I believe it was the 3rd landing or the 4th. I think Alan Shepard, when he hit that little 6-iron off the moon, is why, how did they, I hate saying they, how did NASA fit the lunar rover on the, and I always wondered that myself, but there was a way that it was, deassembled and collapsed and this and that and the other.
Yeah.
That was another one.
And then there was also the if you look at the sand or the dirt that puffs up and stuff, the one of the arguments is that in the video footage you could see that at least according to some people that argue the point that if you look at it you'll see that it actually is moving. It's the dust, the
particulates.
The particulate is moving too fast for it being on the moon, being less gravitationally so that was one of the arguments. Like,
Yeah,
you know,
I don't know that particular because I know it's one
that was
sixth the
one of the
gravity.
that was one of the arguments that I
Because
heard.
I think I believe it's like 1/6 your weight. Like if you weigh 200 pounds, you'd be
Yeah.
1/6 that weight there. Because
Yep.
keep in mind, it's a smaller
Smaller
object, so
object.
there's
Yeah.
not,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, the density. And
Newton's law of mass and all
so,
that stuff.
I mean,
But let me ask you, so far,
yeah.
the United States, the expectation psychologically for 9 years is going to the moon.
Yep.
We are on the moon. A billion people saw this live.
Okay.
Three, probably 10, maybe 20, maybe more thousand scientists and people that supplied the paint and the material, the fuel, the infrastructure to make the launch pad, all of that, all these people involved,
Yeah.
right? And also the scientists themselves at Houston and at Cocoa Beach and wherever else, and President Nixon. Well, of course, he was a liar, so forget that part. All to this point are engaged in a conspiracy to mislead the world that we did not land on the moon. And not one of those persons, 60 years later, has come forth with definitive, dispository evidence to the contrary. You're telling me that all these people, all these resources, everybody that was collectively joined together to create this beautiful rocket, 6 landings, all the astronauts, all their families, all the other people that supported those efforts, none of them have written a book about it definitively.
Well,
none of them have come forward on CBS to say the whole thing was fake.
So-
Other than the tinfoil guys like you. I could see that tinfoil under that hat.
All right. Hold on. Okay.
Inside reality, folks.
I'm not taking the position. I mean, I'm taking the position just for this conversation, but I'm not.
Right.
I'm not saying that I believe that we didn't go to the moon. Okay. I do have questions about it, and of course I challenge that. Now, that being said, there are some. So first off, what you're describing and all the systems and everybody and all that, those can still happen, even if the conspiracy is true, meaning we didn't go to the moon. Okay,
Yeah.
because you don't need a handful of people that know that truth and was part of that production, if you will, right? And so that's one.
So where
part,
did the
you know.
rocket go? We all saw the launchings of the rockets.
Yeah, well, the launching and into space
So
and
it
all
just-
that is
it-
still
It
there.
just went into space.
Well, no,
and
and
all
then-
the people monitoring it with their little radar screens and the communication.
No.
How did the transition happen from
Any of
that point
so
to
here-
the studio in Hollywood
let me-
or whatever
let
the
me-
hell you tinfoil people think happened?
I mean, for all we know, we don't have a way to confirm that they were actually beyond the orbit of the Earth the whole time. Okay? We don't. We just know that they went on this journey, they went up in space, so that could have happened, right? And they could have just orbited the Earth for however long it was before they returned, okay? So any of that could have been the scenario.
So
Okay.
the 3 astronauts and their wives and their families and all the people that supported the phony studio in LA, none of them they've kept that secret for 60 years. That's
Well,
what you're
like
telling
I said,
That's what you're telling the audience.
What I'm saying is that the only way that something like this could have happened in terms of, the conspiracy itself could happen is if the circle of people that are involved is a small, very small group, okay, whatever that is.
To create a fake moon landing is small? Creating the surface of the moon,
okay, hold
the
on.
people that supplied the fake moon dust, the people that created the fake mountain over there, the fake hill,
remember-
the lighting,
okay, but
the
you gotta
backdrop,
remember
the
the back-
camera, the
you gotta look at-
production, the astronauts themselves. They're all involved in a conspiracy?
Well,
Come
not
on.
necessarily all of them. Some
And
of them.
nobody's come forth to reveal this amazing secret?
Well,
Come on.
I guess that I'm not an expert in this position, so I can't speak of who is or who isn't. I mean, certainly if somebody in the audience watching this show knows somebody that can provide more details on this position of we didn't go to the moon, we'd love to hear it from you, drop in the
Love to hear
comment
it.
and we follow up, as a conversation. Now, again,
Yeah.
all my point is that we look at the backdrop politically, right? Now, obviously, the challenge to the country was great because it really turned the gears of our society, right? I mean, from the time when this was presented, right? I mean, JFK, of course, didn't even survive. I mean, he didn't live to see this come to fruition.
Yeah,
I
and his
mean,
brother was
yeah,
assassinated the year before. So
yep,
yeah.
yeah. But I mean, I'm talking about his brother.
So
I'm talking about
what
him.
did it accomplish?
So, well,
other than we
remember,
went to the moon.
we're
What
dealing
did it
with,
accomplish?
well, remember psychologically, like we were saying, right? I mean, we're in the midst of this Cold War, right? And so how can we lose to the Soviets? I mean, that's the first rule. Now, in my mind, these footage, I think that the footage may be real, in terms of what these guys that says we didn't go to the moon, it was all fake, went to. And I believe that footage is probably authentic. And but my explanation is a little different, right? So I think this actually dovetail our next part of our conversation about this binary thinking and this either or type of society, right?
If we have time.
We either did we go to the moon or did we not go to the moon, right? That's the answer. And I think that both of those scenario might be true. And here's why.
Let me ask you that. You keep saying, did we go to the moon? I believe not only did we go to the moon, we landed on the moon.
Sure.
So those two different things.
Okay,
'Cause
landed
we went
on
to
the moon. Okay, landed on the moon.
We land
on the moon. Okay.
With
landed on
Homo
the moon.
sapien called
Correct.
astronauts.
Yes. Okay. What I'm getting
I
at.
said yes. I say yes.
Yes, and I agree with that too. So, but I'm in terms of addressing the footage that, like I said, that floated around saying that we didn't go to the moon. Here's why. Here's the video, proving it and so forth. Right. So, and in the backdrop of this political climate, I think that was actually produced, the video, as a contingency. So it wasn't that, and that was supposed to be the footage that was supposed to be destroyed maybe and ended up getting leaked out. And so that's why you have this conspiracy.
So you keep talking about footage. What are you talking about when they were actually, when Aldrin and Neil Armstrong were on the moon? And when Alan Shepard was on the moon and all those
according to the people,
I think there were 12 astronauts on the moon in a
according to the
4-year period or something?
According to the people that challenged the moon landing, I think it was only mainly the first one, right? Some have come around and said, okay, we've landed there since. Now, of course, the other.
So now you just amended your. Okay,
no, I'm just saying that. I mean, well, again, it's one of those things. Well, if we've done it so well, then why haven't we been back to the moon in 50 years, 60 years, or whatever? So that's been part of the question. How did we solve the radiation of the Van Allen belt, for instance, is another issue that and so forth. I mean, there's so many technical and things. I'm not here to say that I know the reason for this or that, but so those are some of the arguments for it, and it needs to be addressed. And I don't think that anybody has addressed it. But anyway, my point about this footage, like I said, has to do with the fact that, remember, you got this political backdrop, right? So that means that you can't really fail in a big way. So you got to.
That's not a true statement at all. Keep in mind what was going on concomitantly. 69 was the year where more Americans died in Vietnam than any other year.
Yeah. So that's even more politically needed. You got to remember.
So the hippies
the galvanization,
the hippies and the intellectuals on the universities, I don't believe we're all that impressed that we landed on the moon.
No, they're not. But that's not the point.
So this argument that it rallied the entire country, I think it rallied the United States in 69, July, for about 2 weeks, and everybody just went about their business. The people that were truly excited were the nerd scientists like me, little boys that continued to be fascinated by it.
Absolutely.
Until this particular moment in time.
Yeah.
But the rest of the country moved on and continued to rally against the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, 69 was the height of the war in Vietnam, where we lost more Americans that year than any other year. I think that was the year of Hamburger Hill too, for example, and the slaughter of also the North Vietnamese, the Cambodians, Laotians. A lot of people don't realize this either. I digress for 1 second.
Sure.
America lost 58,000 Americans during Vietnam, right, for a 10-year period,
like
whatever.
That, yeah.
Do you know how many people in Vietnam lost?
Oh, millions.
Almost 2-3 million people.
Yeah,
So
I mean, my family's from that area, so during that time, so I understand.
So at least 2 million Vietnamese, Laotians, and Cambodians died. But anyway, so that was also going on
Correct.
as we landed on the moon.
Yeah.
The height
Which is
of death
which is
at
again
Vietnam.
which is why I think that the point of it is that, I mean, remember, this is like a critical junction that again drives the opportunity, right? So if people, I mean, if we fail to go to the moon, let's just say we did, okay,
Land on the moon.
land on the moon and got off and all that. I mean, if we failed at that on that mission, right, it could have, I mean, given the political turmoil that we were in, I mean, we could have seen a very, very different turn, you know, in terms of our. So
What do you mean? If we didn't land on the moon, I don't think, you know, I don't.
You don't
what
think the
would-
consequence of not landing on the moon in '69
No.
would have
No,
politically
because
been
because the PR people at NASA would have said, you know what, we made this effort, we got this far, we went around the moon,
yeah,
the landing
but-
didn't work out, we're going to try again.
You think that the funding would be available for another attempt, especially if lives were lost?
Under Nixon's, lives were lost during Apollo 1. I just told
No, I understand that, but that was a
three
different.
astronauts were incinerated in the space capsule.
I understand it, but that was then.
So
We're
you're
talking about
telling me Richard
1969.
Richard Maniacal Nixon, with his ego, hyperbolic as it is or was,
Sure.
was going to allow on his watch the failure of the moon landing under his watch? Are you crazy? No way. No
Well,
way.
that's exactly what I'm saying, which is why you have to have contingency, and that's why I'm making the case.
There
that
is no contingency. We landed on the moon in July of '69.
I understand what you're saying, but what if we didn't land on the moon?
What if Columbus thought, you know, he thought he was in India and he landed in the West Indies? What if that never happened?
Yeah, of course.
You know what
I
would
mean,
have happened? Somebody else 10 years later would have landed on the West Indies. But Columbus did it. So, you know, that's why Indians are
Well,
called Indians. And,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
Columbus Day is no longer a federal holiday or whatever. It's called Indigenous Day.
Yeah, but you know, you got the Vikings
I don't
here.
like hypotheticals.
It's
okay?
not hypothetical. I mean, even in the case of Columbus, we discovered that, hey, the Vikings were here even before, you know, I mean, and discovered the new world, so to speak. I mean, not the part that he discovered, but certainly that other part, you know.
Yeah, so far you've utterly failed to demonstrate a position that represents the definitive position that we did not land on the moon in July of '69.
Okay.
And then I believe 5 more missions after that,
Okay,
concluding in December of '72, which geologist and former Senator Harrison Schmitt from New Mexico being the last astronaut to leave the moon. So all these people that were astronauts, just the 6, plus the other 3 that were orbiting because they didn't land, all never revealed that the whole thing was fake.
So
Even the first one that you argue was fake. None of them did.
well, again,
I think Buzz Aldrin sort of alluded to it one time.
yeah,
but then
exactly. There's been,
yeah, but then he recanted it and said I was just
yeah, but
kidding.
then again, that's part of that's part of what it gets tricky, right? When you're dealing with what can be allowed, right? I mean, remember, classified is classified. I mean, who knows? I mean, certainly we.
Oh, come on. It's 60 years later.
Yeah.
They probably told their kids, if it was fake, come on, people can't
No.
keep a secret
okay,
that long.
Let me
Not
again,
something this cogent
what-
and
my
salient and
argument-
consequential.
my
It does
argument
not
isn't-
happen.
My argument isn't did they go and landed on the moon or not landed on the moon. That's not really my position. I mean, that is part of the conversation, obviously. I'm just saying that some of the things that were there that are evidentiary of the fake of the faking of the landing, okay, are there as contingency, not so much. That's my, so this is what I'm saying is that it's not an either or, it's a third position, okay, that basically address some of the evidences, and in my mind there was reasons why, and valid reasons why, that needed to happen at that time in order to make sure that we reach a success from a public standpoint, okay, at all costs, okay. And I mean, of course, thank God we did land on the moon, so
therefore,
the need for that wasn't necessary. What's that?
Let me annihilate that argument.
Okay.
Let me annihilate it.
All right.
Let me
All right,
obliterate
please.
it. If we're going to assume that a failure would have just basically concluded uh, the continuation of this effort to land on the moon, then why didn't we do it in 1960, 61 when all those
Because it's a
Mercury and
different.
Titan, let me finish, when all those rockets blew up on the launch pad in front of God and everybody? Did you know that there were several live broadcasts of these rockets when they were just launching the rocket itself, right? Not even Ellen Shepard or Glenn. And many of those rockets blew up.
Yes.
You're not telling me that wasn't embarrassing and an utter failure. But you know what NASA said? That's progress. We learned something. So we continue to move forward with this effort. You're telling me that wasn't utterly embarrassing when Russia was continually successfully, because remember, after Sputnik, they launched other rockets. They were the first one to launch. I forgot his name, Ergov or Yurgov or whatever the hell. Remember the astronaut that
Yeah.
went into orbit?
Mm-hmm.
The Russians weren't the first ones just to launch a satellite. They were the first ones to launch a human being into Earth's orbit. You're aware of this?
Yeah, I do
Okay, so
recall a
the
little bit of
point
that.
is, uh, and then months or a year later or something like that, we're launching a rocket, it blows up. So you're telling me the United States didn't lose an Asian expression face in front of the world and wasn't utterly abashed and embarrassed? Yes. And yet, guess what they did? They continued with the science. They
Yeah.
continued to move forward with the Mercury program, Gemini, and concluding with Apollo. So we've got about 9 minutes.
Okay. So
Did you ever see the end of Perry Mason when the guy just utterly confessed in front of? This is what I feel like. This is like I mean, you're my friend, but
no,
come
no,
on,
no.
dude.
I again, you're making the case that almost a decade earlier, the failures then, okay, is enough to shut down the mission, if you will, right?
I'm
And
not
that
making that case at all. I'm saying they did not
no,
fail.
no,
They
I understand that.
continued.
But the political climate in at that time in the early 60s was different than in the late 60s when this would have occurred. This is why I'm
Yeah,
saying. I mean,
to
remember,
some degree.
we
To
weren't
some degree.
in I think we were in Vietnam what 64, 65, I think, right?
64, I think.
When we
64.
when we first went into Vietnam,
Actually,
right?
63, because I know Kennedy did insert
Yeah, yeah,
some
but
presence there.
the full it was after
The full scale was like
full scale was
64,
yeah, it was
65. Yeah.
after yeah, because I
Yeah.
think from my understanding that if he wasn't assassinated, they would not have gone in, and that was one of the
Well,
one of the reasons why he was assassinated. I mean, that's one of the positions or perspective that he would have not been if he had if he had survived or not been assassinated, we would not have been in
well,
Vietnam.
there's debate about that. His last interview, he said ultimately it's their war. They
Yeah,
got to
exactly,
fight it.
and that's
So
what
he did say
created.
that. But
Yeah. So anyway,
you
that's
can
another
extrapolate
conversation.
from that what you
Yeah.
will.
So people that wanted the war, continued it anyway. So,
Right.
so I'm just pointing out that the popularity of the war became heightened at that point, and like you're saying, all the political stacking, and so they have to have a win in a way that will not create and of course they thought in my mind this is what it's again we're looking at the political elites here, right? We're looking at the people that are maneuvering and pulling the strings. So in my mind that's what's
So
happening
now
is
you're
that,
telling me that Nixon and the executive branch, Congress and Senate were involved in the conspiracy to
well,
fake the landing?
I don't know who was involved, okay, but I do know that whoever is involved, they had a political position to maintain in order to make sure that we didn't lose enough momentum. That and also I think that the other part is that the success was in a way intended, or it was an opportunity for that to be a distraction, which you already pointed out that wasn't as much of a distraction from the war, right? And so those are all at play in my mind, how these things could have come about, right? So
Certainly, and I agree with you to this extent. Certainly, the United States, in its arrogance, wanted the height of science, apex demonstration,
sure,
technological apogee. No pun intended. That's a astrophysic word. Uh, to demonstrate that we're the leader of the scientific world
yeah,
with the landing, no question.
yeah,
All I'm saying is, if what you say, or if the position the foil tinfoil people say did not land on the moon, and it was faked, somebody would have come forth in 60 years with obvious dispositive evidentiary evidence, definitive evidence that we did not land on it. And that has not happened.
Actually,
That has not happened.
from if I remember correctly, I remember listening to I was on a trip back
5
east.
minutes.
I was on a
5
trip
minutes.
back east, and we I was listening to, I think it was one of the Coast to Coast episodes, and they had this discussion and conversation, and actually they, if I remember correctly, they had somebody on there that was part of this group that said that they were part of, they were not the insider group, but
Okay, fine.
so
If
there
that
are
is
there are
true,
some people
and-
that have
but
come
let me-
forward that have pointed, but they haven't been given any
let me
platform.
move forward. Let me move forward that point.
Okay.
If that person was the cameraman at
Or
Hollywood
whatever, yeah.
with the fake whatever, or the lighting director,
Yeah.
or whatever, then why hasn't that person's position, if true, gained any traction? That would be one of the stories of the millennium.
Yeah, but there's
That
a
would
lot
be
of things.
one of the three
Yeah,
s-
but you can't use the position that because it could be a big sensational thing that because of that it would get attention. No, we've seen plenty of things that have real significant, that have no.
The Kennedy
attention.
assassination has been blown up, no pun intended.
Sure.
Oswald killed Kennedy.
And
He
that's
just-
it. And that's the
I just-
position. And that's
he
it.
just did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's still plenty of.
There's been 3,000 books about everyone else,
Sure.
but Oswald killed Kennedy, and none of those has brought forth any science or any forensic evidence to establish otherwise.
Depending on who you.
The magic
trust.
bullet. They forgot that Conley was in a jump seat, which was lower. The angle. Nobody forgot about the jump seat.
Yeah.
They always thought he was at the same
Yeah,
parallel level horizontally relative to the shot coming down, but they forgot he was lower and blah blah blah.
All right.
So
Okay.
3 minutes.
In this 3 minute, let's transition. I know that the binary thinking society, and this is where I think that you're
That
stuck.
needs to be-
Okay, I'm calling
go.
you out on a hypocrisy here. Okay, you're in this
Sure.
binary thinking. You're stuck in that either we landed on the moon, we didn't land on the moon. I'm
Well,
just giving a third. I'm just giving a third perspective that is basically trying to explain that both position was the intended outcome. It's just that whichever one gained the attention or the traction we went with. And
Jimmy, I don't think you made yourself clear what that third position is. Either someone's pregnant or they're not. And men cannot have babies. Don't get mad. I didn't invent biology. I just didn't. You talk to Darwin and paleontologists and these other people, but either we landed on the moon or we didn't. I believe we did 6 times. I believe it was 6.
And
6 missions, I think.
And yes, I agree with you. We did. I'm just saying
But not the first one.
No, I'm not saying that either. I'm just pointing out that because of the evidence that has been presented about it not having happened, I'm explaining that there was a third position that could have been there, which was to make sure that whatever happens, that we are going to land on the moon, even if we didn't.
The
That's my-
contingency theory.
Yeah, the contingency theory is what my theory is about this. So
That's
there
like
you go.
that's like a guy getting married, making sure that he had a good relationship with his ex-girlfriend, just in case.
Well, that is
I mean, people do
non-binary,
carry-
right? I mean, in terms of the position.
People do carry a spare tire. No, but it isn't it's not non-binary because either we did land on the moon or we didn't.
Correct.
The contingency, in my view,
Is to
I
the contingency
don't-
is there
I
to
don't think it
support-
was insurance to guarantee that we can demonstrate to the American zeitgeist.
Well, it's actually the
zeitgeist
world at this point because
that-
remember we have TV.
Okay, fine. But you just said America was.
Yeah, but America was the
one that would
main
most
audience.
enjoy
That was the audience.
Fulfillment of the accomplishment. I just don't buy into any of that tinfoil argument. And I know next Inside Reality, you're going to argue the Earth is flat, and I'm going to.
I have another. That one is an interesting one too, and there's some, interesting thesis
All right.
on that. But
Well, how
anyway.
can people be part of this podcast, Jimmy?
So feel free, drop in the comments. We'd love to hear from you, obviously, because we like these type of conversations, spurring discussions and so forth, feedback. We always ask that you be respectful. I mean, we don't need any, inflammatory, whatever. You can certainly, like I did, call out Jeffrey on being hypocritical about his view of the world being binary or not binary.
We're gonna do a
In
show
terms of
on that.
thinking. Yeah, we will, and we'll
We're
talk
gonna do
about
a
that
show on
more. Yeah. But anyway, Patreon, support us that way, and then of course we'll introduce some other stuff, including some merchandise and stuff like that. Maybe we'll do it on Apollo, tinfoil type of hat. Anyway, thank you, Jeffrey. Great having you. Always a great conversation, and we'll talk to you next time.
You look good in tinfoil, by the way. Sticking it.
All right. See you later.